Welcome, everyone. We are going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects today, which is not functional exercises, functional outcome measures. They coincide with functional exercises, but functional outcome measures is basically things that you can do to track your progress so you can see how you're doing and is what you're doing actually getting you the results that you're looking for. So, we're going to dive all into it. If you don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Gretchen Hawley. I'm a physical therapist and multiple sclerosis certified specialist, and I specialize in helping people with MS get stronger and walk better through functional exercise and neuroplasticity strategies. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. All right, so as promised, functional outcome measures. We're going to be talking about what they are because it's important to know what they are in order to be able to utilize them to the benefit that they can be for you. So, we're going to talk about what functional outcome measures are, the different types of functional outcome measures, examples, and at home testing. So, I am going to be doing some demonstrations back here to demonstrate how to actually utilize these at home. So, first and foremost, what are functional outcome measures? Functional outcome measures are a test that you can do that quantify a patient's improvement of function throughout an episode of care. So typically these are done in a physical therapy clinic or occupational therapy or even your neurologist. So an episode of care just includes the amount of time that you are with that healthcare professional. If it's physical therapy, it's going to depend on your insurance, but it might be a few weeks, it might be a few months, maybe a year, probably not if you're in the United States, but that is an episode of care from your evaluation until your discharge. And throughout that time, you're going to be doing functional outcome measures. Whether you know it or not, your physical therapist or occupational therapist is going to be testing you in certain ways. And your neurologist can do this as well. And we're quantifying measurable improvements as we're working together. So, why is this important? First of all, it's important for you and your goals because when you're going to see a neurologist, physical therapist, any healthcare provider, more likely than not, one reason is because you're working on goals. You're working towards getting stronger or walking better or getting in and out of your car easier, standing up from the floor. And you want to know if you're on track towards reaching those goals or not. Because the reality is, when you have multiple sclerosis, it can take a long time to reach your goals. And if it takes a long time, that can often mean that you're getting discouraged or defeated and feel like, well, must not be working because it's taking forever. But if you do functional outcome measures and you do these tests, whether it's at home or with your neurologist or physical therapist, it can help you realize that you are getting better because you're seeing improvements in these tests. And yes, it might take a little bit longer for you to see these improvements in real life situations, but it can show you that you are improving. Or it can show you you're not improving. And maybe that means your MS is changing, or maybe that means you're not doing the right exercises for you and your goals. So maybe you do need to start working with a physical therapist again. So the number one reason why functional outcome measures are important is for you to track how you're doing physically with your strength, your balance, your fatigue, your walking, etc. But it's also important for insurance reasons. At least in the United States, we have to submit so much information to try to get as many physical therapy visits as possible with our patients, especially when it comes to MS, because a lot of the times our goals might just be to maintain strength levels, maintain balance, maintain fatigue, and just not let it get worse. But with insurance, if they see maintenance, they might see that as a bad thing. But if we can at least show via these functional outcome measures that you're maintaining or even improving, you're more likely to get more physical therapy sessions versus being cut off really quick. most people out that I know with multiple sclerosis see their neurologist either once a year or twice a year. But as several people have admitted, sometimes it's every other year or it's just as needed. And if you're only doing functional outcome measures at your neurologist's office and you're only seeing them once a year, twice a year, once every other year, whenever it's necessary, you won't be tracking how you're doing, and you won't know if you're on target with what your exercises should be doing for you. Same with the physical therapist. Oftentimes when you're working together with a physical therapist for physical therapy sessions, you'll be working together maybe once a week up to 3 times a week for anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks, depending on your insurance and what they will allow. Maybe it's less, maybe it's more, but then you stop and you don't start physical therapy again for maybe 6 months or a year. Again, mostly it's depending on your insurance. And if you're stopping, you won't know if your exercises are right for you, or are they getting too easy and you need to progress them? Are they too challenging and you need to modify them? Keeping track of how you're doing physically and measuring your progress or regressions or maintenance is so important to understand what you need to reach your goals. And if you're only seeing your neurologist once a year or infrequently, and your physical therapist infrequently once you've been discharged, that can be a problem, because we want to stay on top of this. So let's talk about who measures these functional outcome measures. So, as I've already mentioned, your neurologist, the ones that might be common for your neurologist to do might be the 9-hole peg test, the 25-foot walk test. Sometimes they'll do like a 600-meter walk test, depending on how the clinic is set up. And they'll have you walk bigger loops or laps around the building. But those are measurable tests. They're measuring how fast you're going or the distance that you're going. Physical therapists also love functional outcome measures. We too will do things like the 25-foot walk test, timed up and go. Occupational therapists also will do functional outcome measures. Typically, those are more so related to upper body strength or hand and fine motor, gross motor skills, sometimes balance. Speech and language pathologists, pretty much any healthcare profession has functional outcome measures, these measurable tests to see how are you doing with specific symptoms like weakness, balance, energy, fatigue, etc. So when it comes to functional outcome measures, there's two types. One is subjective and the other is objective. So the way that these are worded, if you hear this in conversation with your healthcare providers, is subjective functional outcome measures or objective functional outcome measures. Subjective functional outcome measures are written. So they're still quantifiable, but they're written. And so they often look like questionnaires. So, two of the ones that are most often done with physical therapists are the MSWS 12, which stands for the Multiple Sclerosis Walking Scale 12. And then the other one is the Modified Fatigue Impact Scale, or the MFIS. So, let's talk about what each of those look like. Let's start with the last one. So the MFIS, the Modified Fatigue Impact Scale. This is a series of 20 questions. And the 20 questions ask about lots of different types of fatigue, ranging from physical fatigue, mental fatigue, and social fatigue. And the way that you answer the questions is you consider how your fatigue has been within the last 4 weeks. And then you rate various statements on a level of 0, meaning never, up to 4, which is almost always. So an example might be, I have been unable to think clearly. If that has not been a problem for you at all, you would score 0. If you feel like, whoa, that's like my daily life, I cannot think clearly, that's a 4, because you almost always feel that way. Another one might be, I have had difficulty making decisions, or I have had difficulty organizing my thoughts when doing things at home or at work. Let's pick another one here. I've been less alert. I have been less able to complete tasks that require physical effort. Let's do one more. I've been less motivated to participate in social activities. So there's 20 statements like this, and then you rate all of them from 0 to 4, and then you add them up and see where you're at. So this is a way to measure your fatigue. Now, one thing that's challenging with all functional outcome measures, and what you might be thinking right now, is every day is so different. So, because of how, when you look at your fatigue over the last 4 weeks, every day could be different. So, we do kind of have to take these with a grain of salt, but at least it's something. At least it's some measurable outcome that we can use to compare to how we were a year ago or 2 years ago. So let's move on to the MSWS 12. So this is the multiple sclerosis walking scale 12. So this is 12 statements that, similar to the modified fatigue impact scale, you need to rate from 1 to 5. So 1 would be not at all, and 5 would be extremely. So with the MSWS 12, you're considering how your walking has been and how your MS has affected you over the last 2 weeks. Again, the last 2 weeks, every day could be different. So you kind of are just going for the average. But some examples of what this questionnaire might ask would be, in the past 2 weeks, how much has your MS limited your ability to walk? 1 would be not at all, 2 would be a little, 3 is moderately, 4 is quite a lot, 5 is extremely. Another example, in the past 2 weeks, how much has your MS limited how far you're able to walk? Another example, in the past 2 weeks, how much has your MS slowed down your walking? How much has your MS made you concentrate on your walking? So you're rating these 12 statements from 1 to 5. And 5, the more fives you have, the more likely your walking has been affected within the last 12 weeks. But you add it all up, and then we can compare to how you were doing previously, whether it was 6 months ago, 1 month ago, a year ago. Because MS is so variable, personally, as a physical therapist and MS specialist, I I take month by month scoring of these, because sometimes you'll do them with your PT every month or maybe every 6 weeks. I take those comparisons with a grain of salt. I am more so looking over time. Overall, how was your test today and maybe the last 3 tests compared to a year ago? That's more so what we're looking for, because MS can be so different every day. If you are using a mobility aid of any kind, and honestly, not just mobility aids, but even electrical stimulation like the Bioness or the Walk Aid or the Sionic Neural Sleeve or an AFO, if you're using anything during your time that you are comparing. So for the MSWS 12, and you're thinking, okay, in the last 2 weeks, how much has my MS affected my walking? Keep that in mind and write it down next to it. I am a huge advocate of taking notes on the specific things that are going into your thoughts. And when we get to the objective ones, we'll continue this. But write down notes on that so that the next time that you fill this out, you know where your mind was at previously. Because if you're thinking, okay, you're taking the MSWS 12 and you're thinking, in the last 2 weeks, how much has my MS affected my walking? And you're thinking about your walking with mobility aids, you might score yourself pretty good because your walking hasn't really been affected because you're using your mobility aids and it's allowing you to walk well. But then the next time you take this test, if you're not thinking about mobility aids, if you're instead thinking about, well, um, how has my walking been affected when I'm not using mobility aids? That score is going to look so different. So write down those notes if you're doing this yourself. If you're working with a physical therapist or neurologist, make sure they are writing down those notes. But if you're doing these at home, write down those notes so that you keep it as most similar as possible. And maybe if you're like me and you love trial and error and just comparison, maybe you take the MSWS 12 twice, once with the mindset of with using mobility aids, and then another time without using mobility aids. So on the same day, you answered the same questions, but just different situations. Same with a modified fatigue impact scale. So keep that in mind as you're doing these tests at home if you are someone who does use a mobility aid or AFO, ankle brace, electrical stimulation, anything. The last thing that I just want to remind you and bring up again is when you're doing at home testing, not only is documenting important, but looking at more than just what the test measures. You also want to pay attention to what your quality is and what your speed is. And are you using a mobility aid or not? And think about all the forms of aids and tools. Are you using trekking poles? If so, are you using one or two trekking poles? And which side of your body are you holding it on? Because that might change. If you're using a cane, what side of the body are you using the cane? When I'm doing this with my patients, I'm even documenting the percentage that they're using the cane. After the test, I will say, how much body weight percentage wise do you think you were putting through your mobility aid? Whether it was a trekking pole, a cane, roll aid, or whatever. If 100% means you were putting all of your body weight through that mobility aid, and 0% is you weren't even using it, it was just pushing along in front of you, you weren't putting weight through it. Where would you land? Write that down because initially you might be putting a lot of weight through your mobility aid, but towards the 6 months testing mark or a year testing mark, maybe you're using it very little. So, are you using a mobility aid? If so, how much? And are you using any ankle brace, AFOs, electrical stimulation, um, anything that you can think of? Write it all down and keeping in mind quality versus quantity. Write down both of those things. When you're documenting, not just quality and quantity and mobility aids, what time of day was it? You want to take consideration of the things that MS can be so variable with, right? You might have more energy in the morning or early afternoon. So if you do this test at that time, you're going to score better versus if you're doing this test and you remembered last minute before dinner and oh my gosh, I forgot to do this earlier, let me do it now. Or maybe around dinner time you don't have as much energy. And it's fine to do the test at that point, but write down that you did it at 6 p.m. or whatever time it was, because that the time of day might play a factor as well. The idea is write down as much as you can so that when you're doing a test again in 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks, you can try to do it the same as the way before, regardless of what type of MS day you're having. And writing down what type of MS day you're having. If today feels like a fatigue day for you, write that down. If it feels like a great day, write that down. There's no such thing as writing down too much. It can be so helpful in helping you track your progress throughout the weeks and months and even years. Ideally, this is something that you would do every 4 to 8 weeks or so. Just keep it on a piece of paper, put it away. Again, you're not really going to be able to get strong notes that mean much until I personally think about the 6 month mark because MS is so variable. And the last thing I want to mention is that these tests, when done at home, there's so much room for error, anyways, compared to in a clinic. So, the more you write these things down and the specifics and the walls that you're using and the chairs that you're using, the better because there's so much room for error, anyways. Let's try to make it as similar as possible to reduce any error. The last thing that I do want to say is you do not have to do all of these tests. If you were to do all of these, especially all in one day, not only is it going to take some time because you're doing 3 of them, you're taking the average, but it's probably going to be fatiguing and there's just not necessarily a need to do all of them. So you could spread them out throughout a few days or just pick your favorites. If you're not really working towards walking or strength, but you really want to keep track of your fatigue, or you do want to keep track of your walking, but in the questionnaire form, then that would be more of the modified fatigue impact scale or the MSWS 12. So you don't have to do all of them. I just wanted to share with you the ones that are, according to research, the best ones to indicate your progress with physical therapy based exercises and potential improvements, regression, or maintenance with your MS, and that can be easily done at home. Have a good day, everyone. Thanks again.